Hey there, horror lovers. Welcome back to Silent Screams, where we dive deep into the darkest corners of the night. I'm your host, and tonight, we're exploring a tale that'll make you think twice about taking that graveyard shift. So dim the lights, grab your favorite blanket, and let's descend into the nightmare together. It was just another night at Mercy General Hospital. At least, that's what I thought when I clocked in for my shift at 11 p.m. The fluorescent lights flickered as I made my way down the empty corridor, the smell of disinfectant hanging in the air. I'd been working the night shift for 3 months now, and I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. As I settled into my station at the nurse's desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavy, almost electric. I tried to brush it off as just another case of night shift jitters, but deep down, I knew this was different. "Hey, Sarah," my coworker, Mike, called out as he approached the desk. "You feeling all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh. "Nah, just tired." "How's it been tonight?" Mike shrugged. "Quiet. Too quiet, if you ask me. It's like the whole place is holding its breath." As if on cue, a shrill scream echoed through the halls. Mike and I exchanged glances before sprinting towards the source of the sound. We burst into room 217, where an elderly patient named Mrs. Jenkins was staying. She was sitting upright in her bed, eyes wide with terror, pointing at the corner of the room. "The shadows," she shrieked. "They're moving. Can't you see them?" I looked where she was pointing, but all I saw was an empty corner. "Mrs. Jenkins, it's okay. There's nothing there," I tried to reassure her. But as I turned to face her again, I caught a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision. A dark mass, shifting and writhing in the corner. I blinked, and it was gone. Mike managed to calm Mrs. Jenkins down, and we left her room, both of us visibly shaken. "What the hell was that about?" he whispered as we walked back to the desk. I shook my head. "I don't know," but I stopped mid-sentence. The lights in the corridor ahead of us were flickering rapidly, creating a strobe-like effect. And in those flashes, I swore I saw a figure standing at the end of the hall. Tall, unnaturally thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. "Mike, do you see that?" I hissed, grabbing his arm. He squinted into the darkness. "See what?" "Sarah, there's nothing there." But I knew what I saw. As we approached the nurse's station, the phone started ringing. I picked it up with trembling hands. "Hello?" I answered. A raspy voice responded, barely above a whisper. "They're coming. Can't you feel them? The veil is thinning." "Who is this?" I demanded, my heart racing. "Look behind you," the voice said before the line went dead. I spun around, half expecting to see that grotesque figure from the hallway. Instead, I saw Mike staring at me with concern. "Sarah, who was that?" he asked. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the lights went out. The entire floor was plunged into darkness, save for the eerie green glow of the emergency exit signs. "Shit," Mike cursed. "I'll go check the circuit breaker. You stay here and keep an eye on things." As Mike's footsteps faded away, I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the area. The beam cut through the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. A soft whimper caught my attention. I turned towards the sound, my light falling on a little girl standing in the middle of the corridor. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, with long dark hair and a pale blue nightgown. "Sweetie, are you lost?" I called out, approaching her slowly. "What's your name?" The girl remained silent, her head bowed. As I got closer, I noticed something odd about her feet. They weren't touching the ground. My blood ran cold as the girl slowly raised her head. Where her eyes should have been, there were only empty, dark sockets. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. I stumbled backward, my scream caught in my throat. The girl, no, the thing, lunged at me with inhuman speed. I ran, my heart pounding in my ears, not daring to look back. I burst through the stairwell door, taking the steps 2 at a time. As I reached the landing between floors, I heard Mike's voice echo from somewhere above. "Sarah? Is that you? I can't find the breaker box. Something's wrong with this place." "Mike!" I shouted. "We need to get out of here now." But as I looked up, I saw Mike's silhouette at the top of the stairs. There was something off about his posture, the way he moved. And then I saw them, dark, writhing shadows surrounding him, seeming to pull at his limbs like puppet strings. "Oh, Sarah," Mike's voice came out distorted, almost sing-song. "Don't you want to stay and play? They're so eager to meet you." I backed away, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. But the cold steel of the railing against my back felt all too real. Suddenly, the emergency lights began to flicker, and in those brief moments of illumination, I saw them. Shadows peeling themselves off the walls, grotesque figures emerging from the darkness. And they were all coming towards me. I ran down the stairs, my lungs burning, desperate to find a way out. But as I reached the ground floor and burst through the door, I found myself not in the hospital lobby, but back in the same corridor where this nightmare began. The little girl was there, waiting for me. Behind her, I could see Mike, or what used to be Mike, shambling towards me, his movements jerky and unnatural. And all around, the shadows were closing in. As I stood there, paralyzed with fear, I heard that raspy voice again, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome to the night shift, Sarah. Your real work is just beginning." The shadows surged forward, and I screwed my eyes shut, bracing for whatever was to come. But the impact never came. Instead, I felt a cold wind rush past me, carrying whispers of forgotten names and lost souls. When I opened my eyes, I was back at the nurse's station. The lights were on, and everything seemed normal. But I knew better now. I could feel them watching, waiting in the spaces between heartbeats, in the shadows that lingered just a little too long. As I sit here, writing this down, I can't help but wonder, was it all in my head? Or have I glimpsed something that was never meant for mortal eyes? All I know is that the night is far from over, and in a place like Mercy General, anything can happen when darkness falls. So, if you ever find yourself working the graveyard shift, remember, not all things that go bump in the night are figments of your imagination. And sometimes, the real horror begins when you clock in. The digital clock on the wall ticked over to 3 a.m., the witching hour. I tried to focus on my paperwork, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my pen. Every shadow, every reflection, seemed to hold a sinister presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A soft tapping sound drew my attention. At first, I thought it was just the old pipe settling, but it grew more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from room 217, Mrs. Jenkins' room. Against my better judgment, I stood up. "Hello?" I called out. No response, just that incessant tapping. As I approached the room, the tapping stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I pushed the door open slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Mrs. Jenkins was sitting up in bed, staring blankly at the wall. "Mrs. Jenkins?" I whispered. "Are you okay?" She turned to face me, and I had to stifle a scream. Her eyes were completely white, rolled back in her head. When she spoke, it wasn't her voice that came out, but a deep, guttural growl. "They're hungry, Sarah. So very hungry." I backed away, my hand fumbling for the door handle. But before I could reach it, the door slammed shut on its own. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. Mrs. Jenkins, or whatever was wearing her face, smiled, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. "Don't you want to feed them, Sarah? They've been waiting so long." The shadows in the corners of the room began to move, coalescing into writhing, tentacle-like shapes. They reached out towards me, and I could hear whispers emanating from them, thousands of voices crying out in pain and hunger. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for this nightmare to end. When I opened them again, I was back at the nurse's station, gasping for breath. Had it all been a hallucination? But then I noticed something on my arm, a series of small, crescent-shaped marks, like something had tried to grab me. And they were bleeding. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to get out, to find help, to warn someone about what was happening in this hospital. I grabbed my phone and keys and made a run for the elevator. As the doors slid open, I came face to face with Mike. He looked normal, but there was something off about his eyes. They were too bright, almost feverish. "Leaving so soon, sir?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "But the fun's just getting started." I backed away, heading for the stairs instead. As I pushed through the door, I heard Mike call out behind me, "You can't escape, Sarah. They've chosen you. You belong to them now." I ran down the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the stairwell. But no matter how many flights I descended, I never seemed to reach the bottom. It was as if the hospital itself was shifting, trapping me in an endless loop. Exhausted and terrified, I burst through a door, hoping to find the lobby. Instead, I found myself in the hospital's old wing, a section that had been closed off for renovation years ago. The air here was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. Broken medical equipment littered the hallways, and faded patient charts hung haphazardly from the walls. In the dim light, I could make out writing on the walls, not graffiti, but desperate scrawlings that looked like they had been etched with fingernails. "Help us. They never let you leave. The doctors are not what they seem." A child's laughter echoed through the corridor, sending chills down my spine. I turned to see the little girl from before, standing at the end of the hall. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a group of figures, patients in tattered hospital gowns, doctors with blood-stained scrubs, nurses with twisted, broken necks. All of them were staring at me with those same empty, black sockets where their eyes should have been. The little girl stepped forward, her feet still hovering above the ground. "We've been waiting for you, Sarah," she said, her voice a chorus of whispers. "It's time for your treatment." The figures behind her began to move forward, their movements jerky and unnatural. I turned to run, but found my path blocked by more of them. They were everywhere, closing in from all sides. I felt cold hands grabbing at me, pulling me down. The world began to spin, and I felt myself falling into darkness. When I came to, I was strapped to a hospital bed. The room around me was a nightmarish fusion of an operating theater and a torture chamber. Ancient, rusted medical equipment lined the walls, and the air was thick with the metallic scent of blood. A figure in a doctor's coat approached me, his face hidden behind a plague doctor's mask. "Don't worry, Sarah," he said, his voice a rasping whisper. "This won't hurt for long." He raised a scalpel, the blade glinting in the harsh fluorescent light. I struggled against my restraints, screaming for help, but no sound came out. Just as the blade was about to touch my skin, a blinding light filled the room. The doctor stumbled back, shielding his eyes. The straps holding me down disintegrated, and I felt a warm, comforting presence envelop me. A voice, kind and powerful, spoke in my mind. "You don't belong here, Sarah. It's time to go home." The nightmarish scene around me began to dissolve, melting away like a bad dream. The last thing I saw was the doctor's mask falling away, revealing a face of pure shadow underneath. I woke up in my own bed, sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, I thought it had all been a terrible nightmare. But then I saw the crescent-shaped marks on my arm, faded now, but still visible. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the hospital administration. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, Mercy General Hospital will be closed indefinitely. All staff are placed on paid leave until further notice. Do not attempt to enter the premises. Further information will be provided in due course." I stared at the message, a mix of relief and dread washing over me. Whatever had happened in that hospital, whatever forces had been at work, they were contained for now. But for how long? As I set my phone down, I caught a glimpse of movement in my mirror. For just a second, I thought I saw a familiar little girl standing behind me, her empty eye sockets staring into my soul. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. I knew then that my ordeal wasn't over. The horrors I had witnessed, the things I had experienced, they had left their mark on me. And somewhere, in the shadows between this world and the next, they were waiting. Waiting for the veil to thin again, for another chance to break through. And when that time comes, will I be strong enough to face them again? Or will I finally succumb to the darkness that now lives inside me? Only time will tell. But one thing's for certain, I'll never look at the night shift the same way again.